Chris McConnell. Mark Wemkin.
Roto Bros signal confirmed.
I'm no longer upset with Terry McLaurin's ADP. I'm no longer upset about it. And I've started off a few shows this year by saying that I am upset about it. But when I was looking at his ADP at the time, I was looking at his ADP and I was looking at other guys that he was getting taken ahead of. However, I'm starting to like it a little bit more. Now, there's still some guys behind him that I would take ahead of Terry McLaurin this year. But the argument is there. The argument is there for Terry McLaurin's season. So we're definitely going to get into that. But first, there's big news. Michael Thomas, just as of like an hour ago, Michael Thomas for the Saints has requested a trade. He has told the Saints he wants to be traded. Now, we all saw this coming. He was supposed to get surgery on the ankle or whatever he's got going on 3 months ago. Never did. Saints tried to reach him, couldn't reach him. He goes to the Saints. He goes to the organization that pays him this mega money. Not always a great idea, right? It's been a little bit of a Cold War in New Orleans. So now Michael Thomas looking to get traded. What is he, 28 years old, going on 29 years old. He's having trouble. He's had trouble staying healthy the last 2 years. And now the question is, should you trade Michael Thomas? What are we doing with Michael Thomas? I've got the answer for you. Right here in the mind of McConnell, I've got the answer for you. I don't really care where he gets traded to. And you've got to remember, I'm speaking more of, I'm a dynasty head. So I'm speaking more from a dynasty standpoint than I am redraft. In redraft, I don't really want him either. Because you gotta look at it. This surgery, he's already going to start the season on the PUP list. Okay, so he's more than likely, odds are, he is going to start the season missing the first 6 weeks of the year. And you can't just say, oh, well, he's Michael Thomas, he'll come back from the PUP list and he'll be, boom, normal Michael Thomas. You can't do that. You've got to account for the fact that he's got to get back in football shape. Because he's not going to be able to get in football shape while he's recovering from this injury. So he's got to get back into the shape that he needs to be in to be the normal Michael Thomas, the dominant alpha wide receiver one that we've come to know, right? So tack on 2 or 3 more weeks. So now it's week 9. And this is best case scenario, by the way. If he starts the season this is best case scenario. You got to give it 2 or 3 weeks. So now you're looking at more than half of the fantasy season being missed, and he's sitting on your bench in redraft, even in dynasty as well. And I don't know what your settings are. Maybe your commissioner doesn't allow PUP list players to be on your IR. So if that's the case, now you're burning a roster spot for Michael Thomas, who may not even be able to help you this year in redraft. But especially, I'm coming from Dynasty more than anything. Especially Dynasty. It's time to trade Michael Thomas. It's time for you to wash your hands of this. And I'm going to tell you why. Number one, I already just briefly mentioned it. It's 2 years in a row he's having trouble staying. He missed essentially all of last year. What good did he do you last year? Nothing, right? He was a waste of time last year. I know because I owned him in several leagues. So, on top of that, the fact that he's going on 28, he is probably entering. You could argue he's still in the prime of his career, but he's probably exiting the prime of his career, okay, with these injuries that he is accumulating. So, there is no Drew Brees anymore. There is no Hall of Fame top 5 ever to do it, pinpoint accurate quarterback, great fantasy quarterback in that under center for the Saints anymore, throwing him the football. It's Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill. Do we really like that for either one of them? We know Jameis loves to throw it down the field, so he's going to be tossing it to Traquan Smith and Marquez Callaway. Marquez Callaway is the name you need to know right now. That's the name you need to watch. While everybody else is going out and getting Traquan Smith, go to your waiver wires and scoop up Marquez Callaway. But with Michael Thomas, he doesn't have what he had anymore. This isn't the Saints of yesteryear, right? Like Alvin Kamara, he's going to be fine. Okay, Alvin Kamara's getting the workload. You can draft Alvin Kamara as a top 3 running back. You're going to be perfectly fine. But with Michael Thomas, how confident do you really think you are? Like, you got to ask yourself that as a Thomas owner. Now, I sold all my shares even before this injury came down. I sort of saw the writing on the wall last year after the injury. I'm like, look, you know what? This offseason, when he's healthy, before the season gets started, I'm going to go ahead before Drew Brees make, like, I want to wash my hands of Michael Thomas and get rid of him. I did it in every league except for one. One of my top dynasty leagues, I couldn't do it until yesterday. I sold Michael Thomas for two second-round picks. Nobody's going to give you a first-round pick for Michael Thomas right now. So if you want Michael Thomas to sit there and burn on your bench for half the season and possibly not even have him do anything for you for the rest of the year when he gets back, if he gets back, now you got to cross your fingers for that, right? If you want to do that, be my guest. In Dynasty, especially in Dynasty, I would not recommend it. Now, there's going to be guys who are competing who are like, I've got the wide receiver depth. I'll sit on him, and it's fine. Let that be their prerogative. But I don't care if you're contending or if you're rebuilding. Either of those types of teams, I'm one of the best teams in this particular league, probably the best on paper. I don't want him. I don't want him. I drafted Elijah Moore in the rookie draft. I drafted Terrace Marshall in the rookie draft. I'm fine with that. Those two guys can replace Michael Thomas. And I have the utmost confidence in both of them that they will. But I got rid of Michael Thomas for 2 second-round picks in 2022. So I'm happy about that. I'm thrilled. Because I had already tried shopping Michael Thomas for a first-round pick and a first and a second. Nobody was biting for good reason. So I finally had to send out trade offers for 2 seconds. Somebody bit. Now I've wiped my hands of this 29-year-old wide receiver who has already had, this is the important part. Not only is he 28, 29 years old, struggling with injuries for the past 2 years, going to miss half the season again this year, may not come back and even be able to help you this year. Drew Brees isn't there. Not only that, but he's already had the best season of his career that we are likely going to see. Michael Thomas is not topping his season from a few years ago. It's not going to happen. I don't care where he goes. He could go to Green Bay and play next to Devonte. It's not happening. It's not going to happen. So we've already seen his apex. We've already seen his peak season. He's got nowhere to go but down. He's got nowhere to go but down. It is time to sell Michael Thomas. I don't care where. Don't say, I'll wait to see where he gets traded in the NFL. Don't waste your time. Now, we can talk about some places that he might get traded. I personally think there's 2 obvious ones, and they're both in the AFC. I think there's 2 good ones in the NFC as well. I think there could be a third contender in the AFC, but they're probably not. I think the Jets maybe, could be interested. I would highly doubt it, but it's possible. They would be my third team in the AFC, and a distant third. The first two teams, the Raiders, they don't have an alpha wide receiver. I mean, they kind of do in Darren Waller, but he's a tight end in name only. So why not pair Michael Thomas with Darren Waller if you are confident that Michael Thomas is going to be healthy when he gets back? That, I think, is a landing spot that makes a lot of sense. Now, if I'm the Raiders, I'm not going to do it. I'm not trading for Michael Thomas in the NFL if I'm an NFL GM. I'm not doing it. But it's John Gruden, and, I mean, come on. We can't put anything past John Gruden, right? So, for me, I think the Raiders, though, make a whole lot of sense. Obviously, people are going to talk about the Chiefs. I mean, that would be scary. I don't think that's going to end up happening, but it would be terrifying, would it not? But they're not one of my teams. The other team, I think, is actually pretty obvious, too. The Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that makes a lot of sense for Jacksonville. If you want to surround Trevor Lawrence with the best possible weapons that you can. Now, you've got Laviska Shenault, you've got DJ Chark, who I think is the alpha there, and you've got Marvin Jones, who is a solid, proven, veteran wide receiver. But I think the Jaguars are going to be fielding calls for Michael Thomas as well. Or not fielding, but calling the Saints about Michael Thomas. So I think those places make a lot of sense, but if I had to lay my money down, I'd probably say the Raiders. And I know all the Bryan Edwards guys out there are like cringing. No, don't do it. I need Bryan Edwards to smash. I know. From your lips to God's ears. But I don't know if I would trust the Raiders to not acquire Michael Thomas. In the NFC, I think the Redskins, Washington football team. Excuse me. Washington football. I think the Washington football team makes a lot of sense as well. And a lot of people have mentioned, for whatever reason, a lot of people have mentioned, I've seen people mention the 49ers, the Rams, the Seahawks for some weird reason. They're none of those teams I don't think are doing. I think the Redskins could, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But I also think the Lions. Who's their alpha receiver? All the targets are going to TJ Hawkinson. I don't want Michael Thomas going there from a fantasy standpoint because I'm all over TJ Hawkinson this year. You guys know he's my tight end 2 overall. He's going to be a volume hog this year. But now if they trade for Michael Thomas, who's also a volume hog, then the second half of TJ's fantasy season gets a little more difficult to read. Because if Michael Thomas does come back, that means he is going to be a volume hog. And now Hawkinson's going to have a legitimate target threat, taking some of those targets away from him. I don't want to see that. But I do think it makes sense. We know they're not trading him in the NFC South. So the Bucks and the Panthers and the Falcons, that's not going to happen. But speaking of the Redskins, I start off the show by talking about Terry McLaurin. I think this could be Terry McLaurin's season. And here's the thing. We all love Terry McLaurin. Very good wide receiver, very seasoned wide receiver, one of the best route runners in the NFL already. Doesn't have that typical alpha size that you would typically like to look for in a guy, but he's the alpha there. He makes it work. Steve Smith didn't have it either when he was with the Panthers. Steve Smith wasn't the prototypical alpha X wide receiver, but he made it work, and so is Terry McLaurin. So did Santana Moss. Santana Moss, years ago for the Redskins. I know some of you remember Santana. He was on some of my fantasy teams in the early mid-2000s. When I was playing in high school, when I first started fantasy, 9th grade, I had Santana Moss on my team. Loved Santana Moss. Okay, but who's the quarterback for the Redskins, for the Washington football team, right? Who's Washington's quarterback? Ryan Fitzpatrick. We know Ryan Fitzpatrick loves to sling the football, right? So it makes sense to like Terry McLaurin. Now, Terry McLaurin's ADP, he's right now he's going as wide receiver 10, 2 QB leagues, super flex. He's going as wide receiver 10. Okay, about 40th overall. Okay. I think that's fair, but he's going ahead of guys like Allen Robinson, like CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Amari Cooper. Adam Thielen is going as wide receiver 19, and I think it's an absolute crime. Each and every one of us that is allowing Adam Thielen to fall to 19 should be thrown in jail. Absolutely thrown in jail. Cooper Kupp, too, is wide receiver 20. Absolute steals. So those are guys that I think could outperform Terry McLaurin this year, especially CeeDee Lamb and especially Allen Robinson. I'm not taking Terry McLaurin over CeeDee Lamb and Allen Robinson. However, there is an argument to be made that Terry McLaurin should be a top 13 wide receiver, and I think that's where I'm going to have him ranked by the end of the night. He's moving up from wide receiver 16 for me. Now, last year, Terry McLaurin finished the season as wide receiver 20. He was 10th in the NFL in targets. He had 134 targets, 10th in the NFL at receiver. I think he's going to see a lot more targets this year. We're going to see him be an even bigger volume hog this year. I think he's going to enter the 140s, maybe even the 150s. He's going to be in that top 5 to 8 range in targets. I really like what's going on here with Terry McLaurin, regardless of the emergence of Logan Thomas. So here's some numbers to consider, okay? And I got to give credit where it's due here. Graham Barfield for these numbers. Ryan Fitzpatrick, okay? We've seen him turn into Ryan Fitztragic, and it hasn't, sometimes it just doesn't work out. But Ryan Fitzpatrick has made alpha wide receivers on football teams more productive when he's the quarterback. Let's start with 2014, shall we? 2014, Brandon Marshall finished the season as wide receiver 34, Eric Decker wide receiver 25. 2015, with Ryan Fitzpatrick, Brandon Marshall finishes wide receiver 3 in fantasy, Eric Decker wide receiver 15. That's a 31 spot jump for Brandon Marshall in 2015. 31 spots with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Eric Decker jumped 10 spots. 2015, Brandon Marshall's catch rate improved by 5.5%. His yards per reception improved by 2 full yards. 2018-2017, Mike Evans had more PPR points per game with Ryan Fitzpatrick, 17.3, than without him, 14.7. 2018, Mike Evans raised his catch rate 10.1%. Raised his yards per reception 3.6, over 3.5 yards. Now, Fitz, it's worth noting Fitz played 3 games in 2017 and 7 in 2018. But this is proof right here, and there's more, that this is going to be a good thing for Terry McLaurin. If you, right now, you could get Terry McLaurin in as your wide receiver 2. But would you really hate it if he's your wide receiver 1? I wouldn't. I would not hate it at all. And you can get him as that. You can get him there. 2019, Devonte Booker. We know this story. We were all out on Devonte Booker, and all of a sudden, boom, here he comes. This Brandon Lloyd-esque blow-up season that ended up being a complete mirage. Devonte Parker scored a career high, 15.4 fantasy points per game. Ended the season as wide receiver 16. He was a league winner down the stretch. We remember that. He won people championships. Devonte Parker raised his catch rate 5.2%, raised his yards per reception almost 4 full yards per reception. So if we look at these trends from these 3 other stops where there were 3 clear alpha wide receivers, it's easy to predict, barring health, it's easy to predict, health permitting, that Terry McLaurin is in for one hell of a year. Terry McLaurin was wide receiver 29 in 2019, wide receiver 20 in 2020. So he's improved each of his first 2 seasons in the league after breaking out in 2019. Okay, so this is a good thing for Ryan Fitzpatrick. I don't care that Logan Thomas has emerged as a quality tight end target. I think that's good for Terry McLaurin. Allowing teams not to key in on Terry. Curtis Samuel's there now, creating space in the middle of the field. They're going to use Curtis Samuel in a bunch of different types of ways. Deep downfield as a gadget player. This is going to create openings for Terry McLaurin. And it's not like Terry McLaurin is one of those guys that you throw the ball to and he doesn't create a lot of separation and he's just bigger and stronger than everybody. Terry McLaurin gets open on his own already because of how good of a route runner he is and because of how quick he is in and out of breaks. So he's already getting open by himself as the lone wolf. But now that he has some quality help in the receiving game, not to mention Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissic coming out of the backfield catching passes, Terry McLaurin's in for one hell of a year, and you got to take it to the bank that he finishes higher as than wide receiver 20, if healthy. And wide receiver 20, that's a wide receiver too. But does he not, if he raises that 9 spots this year, was that wide receiver 11? So it's easy to see how Terry McLaurin finishes the season as a fantasy wide receiver 1, and we should all be keying in on this when you can get him as your wide receiver 2. So yeah, originally I thought Terry McLaurin going as, above CeeDee Lamb, and I still think I'm not taking him over CeeDee Lamb. I think CeeDee Lamb is going to end up as the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy and real life for the Cowboys this year. You guys know I think Dak's going to win MVP. I think they're going to rip through the NFC East. And this is going to be a fantasy offense that we're just going to drool over, barring health. Got to say that because of Dak. Okay, Allen Robinson, the most underappreciated, underrated wide receiver in the entire league. Bar none. And in my opinion, he's a top 5 talent at the position. But nobody sees him. Nobody sees him because he plays in Chicago. He's playing with Andy Dalton. He's playing with Mitch Trubisky. Justin Fields hasn't broken out yet. So nobody is seeing Allen. Everybody's just forgetting about Allen Robinson, it seems like. Nobody ever talks about him. Everybody's talking about Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill. Nobody's talking about Allen Robinson. So I would take Allen Robinson and see, but I can't crucify anybody if they decide to take Terry McLaurin above those guys. Because there is real data to support the fact that Terry McLaurin is in for a solid fantasy football season. And I have slowly begun to try to acquire him in best ball, acquire him more in best ball, acquire him more in redraft leagues. It's really hard to acquire Terry McLaurin in Dynasty. He is a Dynasty darling. And if you're playing with guys who are skilled players in competitive leagues, you better be ready to give up an arm and a leg for Terry McLaurin. And here's another thing with Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's already said that they're trying to implement more of an aggressive downfield threat in the passing game this year in Washington. Well, that's definitely good for Terry McLaurin, I'd say. Definitely good for his ADOT. Average depth of target. For those of you that don't know. During Miami's 2019 season, Fitzpatrick completed 19 of 52 passes that traveled 20 or more yards. In 2020, he completed 11 of 17 such throws in 7 starts. Just to kind of put that into a little more context, Washington's quarterbacks last year had a total 55 deep shots, which would have ranked 18th in the league. Dwayne Haskins and Alex Smith were horrible. They were wretched on downfield attempts, only completing 12 of 44 passes for over 20 yards. That's going to improve with Ryan Fitzpatrick. So, all of this said, it looks to me like Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be a boon for Terry McLaurin's fantasy value. And I know it's late for some of you to be like, oh, I got to acquire Terry McLaurin. But if you haven't drafted yet, think about the strategy you're going in to the draft with. Think about that. And ask yourself, do I want to alter that strategy at all to acquire Terry McLaurin? And speaking of draft strategy, let's update everybody on the draft that I'm currently in, because I feel like that'd be fun. We've had a couple episodes where I've talked a lot about my personal draft strategy in redraft leagues this year. You guys know I'm a dynasty head, but I think it's really important, even for dynasty folks, to keep their skills sharp in redraft. Join some redraft leagues. Do some. That way you're always keen on the ADPs in redraft. Play multiple games. It's fun. Play them all. Play all the formats. But everybody knows by now what's my strategy going into the draft in redraft leagues this year. Ideally, I want to pick anywhere from 9 to 12. I want to pick at the back of the first round because I want that second round to come up on me really quick because I want to grab one of the last remaining workhorse running backs. I want to go back-to-back running backs at least because I think it's okay. It's okay for you guys, and this is a big piece of advice you need to listen to if you haven't heard it before. It is perfectly fine to go into your draft with the strategy of, okay, in round one and round two, in round one I'm going to do this, round two I'm going to do that. After round two, forget about it. Let the board fall to you. Because after the second round, things start to get a little more unpredictable. You can pretty much guess. First round, you're going to have a workhorse running back. You're going to have a quarterback there. Going to have a top flight wide receiver. Second round, you pretty much know. For the most part, you're going to have the same thing, right? But in the third round, that's where things get a little more dicey, a little more unpredictable. You don't know what you're going to get. So there's no point in going into the draft and saying, I'm going to do this in the first round. I'm going to do this in the second round. I'm going to do this in the third round. And so on and so on. Because if you go into a draft with that strategy, well, I'm going to start off with 4 running backs, and I'm going to start off with a quarterback and a wide receiver. You don't know how the board's going to fall. Especially if you're drafting with people that you don't know, that you're unfamiliar with. There's going to be surprise picks. There's going to be bad picks made. Someone's going to snipe you on a player that you wanted, on a position that you wanted. So it is bad process, fundamentally bad process to go into a fantasy draft saying, I'm going to do this in the first 5 rounds. Because you don't know what's going to happen in round 3 to round 5. You don't know. So go into the draft with a 2-round strategy. And after the second round, let the board fall to you. Because if you go into the draft with a 4 or 5 or a 3, 4, 5 round strategy, and the board doesn't fall your way, now you've pigeonholed yourself and you're stuck with a strategy that you're no longer as cemented on as you were before the draft began. So let the board come to you and then make your decision. But everybody knows the strategy that I like to deploy here in these redraft leagues, right? I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to go through this draft through 12 rounds right now. I think it's almost my pick, actually, in the 13th round. But we're through 12 rounds right now. And so I'm going to kind of go through the draft that I've done so far. It's a super flex league, 12-man super flex, one tight end spot. PPR, of course, like there's any other way to play. So I picked 10th, which is a great spot. That's where I love to pick. So it worked out perfectly. Austin Eckler was my first pick. And I want Austin Eckler because he is a workhorse. I've said it a million times. I feel like there's an echo in here. He's a workhorse running back on a rock-solid offense with a much-improved O-line that on a team where he is going to, his touch security is perfectly fine. Touch security meaning his backup running backs, Justin Jackson, Josh Kelly, they're not a threat to his starting workload. We're not worried about Justin Jackson and Josh Kelly taking touches from Austin Eckler, right? And even if they do take some goal line touchdowns from Austin Eckler, what happened a few years ago? Remember when Austin Eckler, by the way, Austin Eckler is a guy who's already done it. He's already been a top 5 running back in fantasy. So we know he has that ability. We know that's in his ceiling. We know that's in his range of outcomes. But what happened last time? A few years ago when Austin Eckler was a top 5 running back in PPR. Did he get a lot of goal line carries? No, he didn't. That's the beauty of Austin Eckler. He's getting all the touches and all the catches, and we already know that receptions matter. On a per-touch basis, receptions are more valuable than rushes. Because if you get 10 targets and you get 10 rushes, more of those rushes are going to go for negative yards, right? So that's why on a per-touch basis, receptions matter for running backs, especially in PPR. And so that's why Austin Eckler and guys like him getting the workload and getting all the carries and getting all the receptions matter so much. So I want to secure a guy like that in the first round. So I did. Comes back around to me, pick 2.3. Third pick in the second round. Najee Harris is still sitting there. Well, we've had this discussion before. I took Najee Harris. Another workhorse running back with a high touch security. Nobody's worried about Kalen Ballage and Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland. I don't care who the offensive coordinator is. Nobody's worried about those bums. Those are that's the epitome of just a guy. They're just guys. Easily replaceable. Najee Harris is a do-it-all workhorse. They're going to barely be taking him off the field as a rookie. Catches a bunch of passes. Is going to be given the rock a ton. His touches are going to be through the roof. We are probably looking at 300-plus touches for Najee Harris. Go back and look. Almost every single season. Go back and look at all of the top 10 running backs that finished the year. What do they have in common? They were getting a crap load of overall touches. Nearly every single one of them was getting over 250 touches. Najee Harris is probably going to approach 350 this year, health permitting. So we've got to keep that in mind. So he's another one. So I'm able to snag 2 of these guys now. And now I'm leaving the second round, going into the third round with my ideal draft strategy. Because we already know that running back is the most valuable position in all of fantasy. We already know that running back is the most valuable position in all of fantasy, regardless of Superflex. That's a myth, by the way. Quarterbacks have more value than they do in one QB leagues. They aren't more valuable than workhorse, high-end RB1 running backs. So, if you're going into the third round with 2 running backs, like Austin Eckler and Najee Harris, or Ezekiel Elliott and Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones and Najee Harris, Austin Eckler, any of those guys, you got to be feeling damn good about your team right now. Because now you have security at the most important position in fantasy. Now I'm going to do you one better. Go and run him back 3 times in a row. And some of you are going to be like, what? Is he serious? I'm dead serious. I'm dead ass serious. And here's why. In the 3rd round, we're going, J.K. Dobbins goes right before me. Who's left on the board? None other than Deandre Swift. Now, some of you are probably wondering and worrying about Deandre Swift because of Jamal Williams. Look, I think Jamal Williams is a fine backup running back. I think he'll have a little bit of a role, but I don't think he's going to be this guy that is a complete buzzkill for Deandre Swift. Deandre Swift, as a talent, is one of the best overall running backs in the entire league already, from a skill standpoint. He's excellent in the receiving game. He's blazing fast. He's a great rusher of the football. He's got everything you want in a running back. And he's going to get fed the rock. And look, it's going to be a little bit dicier in the 3rd round. You're not going to find a guy like Austin Eckler or Najee in the 3rd round. You're just not. There's going to be a little risk with touch security. It's not going to be as safe in the 3rd round as it is in the 1st and 2nd. Okay? Logic tells you that. But we always talk about talent wins out. Talent finds a way. And most of the time it does. That's what I'm gunning for with Swift. So when Swift was sitting there, I'm like, okay, it's super flex. I could take a quarterback. I could take a big-time wide receiver. But what if Najee Harris gets hurt? What if Austin Eckler gets hurt and I wait on a run? I pass on Swift here in the 3rd, and I'm like, I'll get Chase Edmonds in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round. I'll get, give me another, Raheem Mostert later on in the draft is my 3rd guy. Which position in fantasy, in real life, is the most injury-prone position in all of fantasy? It's the running back position. So knowing that, why would you do anything other than try to get as much security? You don't want to predict injuries, but you can prepare for them. So why do you not want to prepare for injuries at the most important position? By tripling up with 3 guys with massive fantasy ceilings and guys that are going to get a lot of work. For the most part, all the touches. The vast majority of the touches. Why would you not want to do that? I'm going to make my next pick live, by the way. But let's move on. So I've got, if Austin Eckler or Najee Harris gets hurt, Chase Edmonds, who does not have touch security with James Conner, Raheem Mostert, who does not have touch security with Trey Sermon, those aren't my RB2s now. I don't have to worry about that as my RB2. I feel great with DeAndre Swift as my RB2 now. It's all about security and gaining a positional advantage over nearly every owner in your league at the most important position in football, in fantasy football. And that's the running back position. Now, some of you are going to say, oh, but you create a disadvantage for yourself by not taking a wide receiver. Because now everybody else is going to have an advantage over you at wide receiver. It's not exactly true. The 4th round comes along, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's a one tight end league. I've got my running backs. I'm set for a few rounds there. Don't have a quarterback left, but I have a target in the 5th round. And I think I'll be able to get him. So it's between tight end and wide receiver. Well, some of you are probably like, you got to go wide receiver. You got to bang it for wide receiver. You have to. Do you? I've already got a positional advantage at running back. Why not get another positional advantage at the tight end position? Everybody's only starting one. We already know that there's going to be at least 3 or 4 positional advantages at tight end this year. Travis Kelce every year, Darren Waller every year. Most people, including myself, think TJ Hawkinson's going to be one with the volume that he's likely to get. And then we have the best tight end prospect we have ever seen in the history of the NFL playing for the Falcons, who is going to be a tight end in name only, just like Darren Waller. He's going to be split out wide at wide receiver. He's a bona fide wide receiver. He's Calvin Johnson. From a measurable standpoint, he's Calvin Johnson playing tight end. So now, I take Kyle Pitts in the 4th round, and now I've got running back sewed up with a positional advantage there, and I've got a positional advantage, a more than likely, odds are, positional advantage at tight end. And you're like, well, Chris, rookie tight ends typically have a hard time coming in and making a difference in their rookie year. Sure they do. But if we're going to give the benefit of the doubt for that trend to be broken this year, wouldn't we give the benefit of the doubt to the greatest tight end prospect that has ever come into the NFL? I'd say so. Not only that, Julio Jones is gone, and he has given up all of these targets. There is a vacuum of targets to be sucked up by Kyle Pitts this year. So he's not going to be at a disadvantage for targets. If Julio was there, I wouldn't be talking about Kyle Pitts in this manner yet. But he's not. Look at all the target. We know that Julio's been a target hog all his career. He had 68, 69 targets in 9 games last year. Imagine what that would have been. You extrapolate that out to 16 games. He's getting a massive target share. He's not going to be hurting for targets. And what do we always say with receivers and tight ends? Chase the volume. Chase the targets with wide receiver and tight end. Chase the touches with running backs. Chase the targets with wide receivers and tight ends. Kyle Pitts is going to have plenty of both. So I leave the 4th round. I go into the 5th. I still don't have a quarterback. Still don't have a wide receiver. You think I'm panicking, but I'm not. I go into the 5th round, and I'm back on the clock, and guess who's sitting there in a redraft league? Tom Brady. A virtual lock to be a fantasy wide receiver, fantasy QB1. Had to pull the trigger. It's a super flex league, so I can't wait on quarterback very much longer to get my first one. So I snap up Tom Brady in the 5th round, come back on the turnaround in the 6th, and guess who's sitting there? Bona fide, top flight, high-end wide receiver 2, more like borderline wide receiver 1, Adam Thielen. The guy everybody's forgetting about. The guy I just mentioned going as wide receiver, 19 or 20? Everybody's forgetting about him. Adam Thielen's my wide receiver 1. 7th round comes back around. I go with Cortland Sutton. Yeah, I know. There's a little bit of a risk there. But we've seen Cortland Sutton be the alpha guy, be the target hog guy, and now he's got help with Jerry Jeudy in his 2nd year, who should improve. And I think eventually this whole Drew Lock experiment's going to be completely dead and over with, and it's going to be Teddy Bridgewater. So that'll be good. It's not Aaron Rodgers like we had hoped, but that'll be better for Denver's receivers than would Drew Lock. So I'm fine with Cortland. I don't want Cortland Sutton as my wide receiver 1. Wide receiver 2 in fantasy, I can live with that. I'm comfortable with that. Comes around to the 8th round, and now I'm seeing this quarterback run happen. A lot of teams have already gotten their QB1. Now a lot of them are looking for their QB2. Starting to get a little nervous. Is he going to make it back to me? Folks, he made it back to me. Justin Fields is my QB2. Justin Fields. I don't care that he doesn't start week 1. Let Andy Dalton be fed to Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald in week 1. That'll speed up the Justin Fields as the starter process, will it not? I'm fine with it. Go for it. I'll swallow the pill of only starting 1 QB in my Superflex in week 1. I'm fine with that. Because Justin Fields' ceiling is Cam Newton rookie year, is RG3 rookie year. He's got that ceiling once he becomes a starter, and we know it's going to be sooner rather than later. Probably no later than week 3. So now I've drafted a QB2 with a massive fantasy ceiling, even in his rookie year, because defensive coordinators are not going to have a lot of tape on him. So I feel very, very good in numerous leagues this year, in redraft leagues, getting Justin Fields as my wide receiver, my QB2. Coming back around, now I'm feeling okay. I've waited on running back long enough. I'd like to get my 4th guy. So I grab Leonard Fournette. 10th round comes around. I'm like, I need a wide receiver. So I'm choosing between Antonio Brown and Tyler Boyd. And I'm like, man, one of them, I'm not going to be able to get both. One of them's not going to make it back to me. So do I go with Tyler Boyd or do I go with Antonio Brown and have the Tom Brady Antonio Brown stack? I ended up going with Tyler Boyd. I think he'll get a little bit more volume than Antonio Brown, barring any injuries to Tampa Bay wide receivers. So I think that was pretty much a coin flip. I have a lot of Antonio Brown this year, so I just decided to sort of pivot to Tyler Boyd. I think they're both really good picks there in the 10th, 11th round. And of course, later on at the end of the 11th round, Antonio Brown ended up going. So I couldn't get the stack, but I'll definitely look into trade for Antonio Brown because Antonio Brown, mind you, is the better value for a Tampa Bay wide receiver in fantasy than Chris Godwin. Pass on Chris Godwin and target Antonio Brown later in your draft. Because when they were on the field together last year, Antonio Brown, not only is he a better wide receiver, Antonio Brown was outproducing Chris Godwin essentially across the board. So keep that in mind. 11th round comes around, and it's time, I think, to draft a running back that I've had a really, really fun time drafting later in the draft. A guy that, if the starter gets hurt, is going to have probably an RB1 workload. And even if the starter stays healthy in Josh Jacobs, he's still going to have plenty of fantasy value, and that's Kenyon Drake. So Kenyon Drake now is my 5th running back. I feel excellent at the most important position in fantasy. If I get injured, if I have 2 injuries, I feel fine. So that happens at the 11th round, and I come back in the 12th round, and you guys know, near and dear to my heart, he's injured. Carson Wentz is there. I've got my 3rd QB. The only other one that was there that really had any value to me as a QB3 was Mac Jones. And I didn't really want to go. I felt better being able to sit on Carson Wentz for a couple weeks until he gets back, because I think from a fantasy standpoint, he'll be better than Mac Jones will be this season. And again, if it's a dynasty league, I'm taking Mac Jones, but it's redraft. So I'm taking Carson. So that's where we're at now, 12 picks in. Now, I'm currently on the clock. As I speak this, I'm currently on the clock. And I think I need to come back and I need to go wide receiver because Antonio Brown didn't make it back to me. So what are we going to do here? Devonte Parker's off the board. I'm going to be honest with you. I really like the pick of Marquez Callaway in the 3rd to last round. In the 13th round, Marquez Callaway is going to be mine. Now, Devonte Parker, I would have taken him, but he just went the pick before me. So there you go. I made a draft pick live in real time for you guys. But that's my team so far. I really like how this turned out, and this is why, for me, I like to start off running back, 2 workhorse running backs, and then come back in the 3rd round and see what's there for me. If Deandre Swift or Clyde Edwards-Helaire somehow, or even, it's not going to happen, but it would earlier on this offseason. Antonio Gibson there, yeah, I'm taking those guys. But let the board come to you in the 3rd round, and let the board come to you from the 3rd round all the way to the end. Stop going in with a 3, 4, 5, 6 round strategy because you're pigeonholing yourself. Well, I thought that'd be fun. My buddy Kevin said he knew it. Kevin knows me so well. He knows me so well. By the way, I want to let you guys know, because I haven't mentioned it, but you've seen it scrolling across the screen for the last hour. Check out the Roto Bros Fantasy Advice Lounge on Discord. It's the best hidden gem in fantasy. You see it scrolling across the bottom there if you're watching live. If you're not, go to patreon.com/RotoBros. We've got a channel for everything. We cover all things fantasy, season long in football, baseball, and basketball. DFS, which is getting cranked up really quick. And, of course, best ball. We cover it all. So please, you guys, check it out. It is a blast, and it is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. And it is going to be extremely busy when the season gets started. So get in there now. And here's the best part. The first month is free for everybody. Everybody. You get a free month. You get a free month. You get a free month. Everybody gets a free month for the Roto Bros Fantasy Advice Lounge. Again, patreon.com/RotoBros. There's 2 tiers, a silver tier, a gold tier, $2, $5, extremely cheap, extremely affordable. You're going to learn a lot of tips, a lot of strategy, and you're going to become a smarter, not only are you going to probably win your league, but you're going to become a smarter fantasy player as well. So check that out. Again, patreon.com/RotoBros. Guys, I gave you the data. I gave you the number tonight. I gave you all the numbers. I gave you the evidence. I gave you the trends. You know what to do. You know what it is this year. It's Terry McLaurin season. Terry McLaurin to the moon, baby.
Thanks for listening.
And don't forget to join the Roto Bros Fantasy Advice Lounge on Discord by going to patreon.com/RotoBros.